Warmly welcome to all of you. This is our 5th webinar session organized by DW Akademie. My name is Pauline Tillman. I'm project manager at DW Akademie, and I have a project where I bring 16 successful media entrepreneurs from all over the world together. We are organizing regularly webinars like this, not only for our startups, but also for DW Akademie colleagues like today also. In the previous month, we were talking about hate speech, about metrics and KPIs, about safety for journalists, and about nonviolent communication. Today, as all of you know, is our topic, remote work. This topic is super relevant for many of you as you're forced right now to work at home because of the coronavirus. And so we will talk about tools and tips for successful home office and hope to give you an idea what are the benefits and also what are the challenges if you work not in the office but at home and remote. And now I would like to introduce you our keynote speaker. You already see him. This is Frederick Fischer. He is journalist and media entrepreneur. Last year, he took a break from journalism to follow a growing passion, as he says, establishing urban communities on the countryside for remote workers. And a first so-called co-dorf, co-village in English, is being built right now close to Berlin. Furthermore, he organized 6-month fellowships for remote workers on the countryside, and during those so-called Summer of Pioneers, participants get a flat internet access to a co-working space, and they bring in return in their knowledge and expertise in the hosting small villages and small towns. So he gained a lot of experiences in remote work, and he's willing to share this with all of you. Thank you, Frederick, for joining us at our 5th webinar. And he will give an input of about 30 minutes, and then we will have time for discussion, approximately 50 minutes. So in total, the webinar is about 1.5 hours. And if you would like to ask questions, I would like to invite you writing them into the chat window, as we are so many participants today. You see there are 56 participants, so quite a lot. It's probably not possible to ask the questions directly via headphone or video to Frederick. So please write them in the chat window, and then we will discuss them afterwards. And the last remark is that I record the session and will upload it on YouTube afterwards, so that also people who are not with us today can watch it afterwards and learn more about remote work. And now, Frederick, this is your stage.
Thank you very much, Pauline. And thanks very much for the invitation and the opportunity. It's really an honor to tell you a little bit about remote work. And I'm very much looking forward to the discussion afterwards, because I think you all have very, very interesting experiences to share, especially during the last few days. I try to keep it rather basic and short, so we have a lot of time to discuss questions afterwards, because remote work is a very wide field, and I guess you have varying levels of experience. Some of you might have very specific needs, others might be completely new to the topic. So I try to keep it rather basic, so everyone can follow, but I'm of course also open to specific questions afterwards. All right, so here's a brief overview of the agenda, what we want to talk through the next 30 minutes. First, a starter pack, just to give you 3 very concrete and easy tools to get going with remote work. That's basically all you need to just start. Then I want to tell you a little bit of like the 3 dimensions of not only remote work, but general work, but there are some extra challenges when it comes to remote. I want to give you some methods to tackle remote challenges, and then I'm open for your questions. All right, so let's dive into it. And of course, this slide wasn't there when Pauline asked me. This is something that caught us by surprise, and it's made. Sorry for the cheap pun. It made remote work go viral. Now it's a topic that really everyone is thinking about, is talking about, and trying to implement in their specific organization. So for some of you, like different shades of remote work might be already common, because there's not only like the traditional office space and the remote workplace. There are different shades of workplaces. There are team offices, of course. There is the open plan office that a lot of journalists know, because a lot of newsrooms are designed like that. There are co-working spaces, and then there is the situation most of us are in right now. I mean, I'm not right now sitting on, on my bed, but maybe some of you are. I'm definitely often working in my bed, so that's the typical image of a remote worker. And at the moment it's very challenging, because the great thing about remote work is that you have more flexibility, and you can freely choose between working in your own flat or going to a co-working space, or maybe even go to the newsroom whenever you feel like, or you have a team office. So it's great to have that flexibility. And at the moment, most of us, we don't have that flexibility, and that makes remote working even harder, because if you're confined to your own four walls, there's not much left of freedom. It feels much more like a confinement, and some of the drawbacks that every remote worker, I guess, feels from time to time, I think, are particularly prevalent right now. And at the moment, like I said, the remote, of course, boomed and dwarfed all the other workplaces. And something that I can't dive too deep into right now is a term called remote first. So what most organizations are dipping into right now is the concept of, we are not all in the same room, so we have to somehow incorporate online tools to get our work done. But that's not remote first. Remote first is really a whole set of guidelines and of techniques, and it's also a sort of corporate culture that enables people who work from everywhere to not only can do their job, but also to be heard. The switch from a regular corporation with a regular office to a remote first company is very complex, and something that we can maybe dive deeper into during the question section. But I just wanted to mention it here first, because I guess it's a term that you will come across more and more often during the next weeks. It's a transition that a lot of companies are in right now. Yeah, for some it doesn't feel that different. So that's something that I found like a week ago, after in Germany for the first time there was talk about quarantine. So when you find out your daily lifestyle is actually called quarantine, a lot of like developers, for example, posted that. I saw that often. But of course, for others, it is a completely new world. Like people who wanted to go to, or used to go to the office every day, and now have to find themselves in a completely new environment, work in a completely new environment from one day to the next. That is a challenge, of course. And it comes very abrupt for most companies. There is a lot of talk about remote work, but if you look at the numbers, it actually is not really happening that fast. So you're all journalists, so you might already have spotted that this graph is a bit sketchy, because it looks like we are approaching the 100%. And that's of course not the case. Like we start out at 3%, and we're slowly heading towards 6% in 2018. And that's the share of Americans working from home, so that's not globally. So it's basically like within almost 20 years, it just doubled from a very low level. So that's not really very much. It's not like such a phenomenal growth as you might think. In Germany, that's particularly true as well. So here, to the question, do you work remotely? Only 15% replied yes, 84% replied no. And they were giving a couple of reasons. So 60% of the 84% that it's just not possible in my line of work. So that makes, of course, a lot of sense. There are just like so many professions that can't be transitioned to online or moved to online. makes a lot of sense. It's not possible in my company. That changed within just a few days right now. So I guess that was 30% basically just vanished. 15% that they're not interested. I guess those 15% also like diminished very much. Everyone is at least interested in understanding what remote work is right now, because everyone's talking about it, and it's so necessary to keep work running. 4% gave other reasons, and 4% gave no answer. So the bad news is it really took a long time to implement remote work in most companies, and up until the very few, like a couple of days ago, it just didn't happen at most places. But the good news is that whoever tried it, like the workers who did it, they are very happy with it. 92% of remote workers say that they are very happy working remotely, and then they don't want to change. They don't want to move back to like a regular office. And of course, that makes a lot of sense because there are rewards connected to remote work. You have more flexibility, especially if you share like bringing up the children. That's of course, like, I think one of the most important aspects that you can really incorporate the flexibility that children always demand of parents. You have less distractions. I mean, some say you have more distractions because there's the dishes that like basically shout at you that they need to be washed, and then you need to vacuum clean the floors, and like basically whenever you have to really focus on working, there's something that needs your attention. But in my experience, and in the experience of a lot of people, that's much easier to get used to and to incorporate and block out than, for example, colleagues. I mean, colleagues are great. Talking to colleagues is great, but if you really look at the amount of time you spend every day in conversations with your colleagues, it's quite remarkable how long that takes, and often that is great, and often very important information is passed on. And it's also, of course, because we are social beings, it's very, very important from that standpoint. But nevertheless, it is, and I particularly found it very distracting. It's also connected to your type of personality. So for example, I'm more like on the introvert spectrum, and for me it always was, I guess, more tiring to have those kind of distracting conversations than for rather extrovert people who can recharge their batteries when they engage in those kind of like real life conversations. So it's remote work definitely is connected to your personality. Some might find it more pleasant than others. Yeah, you have no commute. I guess that's a plus for everyone. I don't know anyone who enjoys commuting. So, and as a result, you have more time, and you can enjoy a higher productivity. And that leaves you more time for other things. But of course, there are also drawbacks. So one of the risks is that you have loose contacts, specifically to your coworkers. So that's exactly what is also on the reward slide, that you don't have those distracting conversations. But yeah, it's also a big plus to have those conversations. And if you don't have those direct contacts, those direct conversations, overall, it is a risk. It's a risk that your voice doesn't get heard. It requires a different skill set to make yourself heard in a remote organization, because showing up at meetings, being funny at the water cooler, all those things, they don't really work if we move online. So that is also something, if you shift to a remote first company, a lot of thought is given to that aspect. Like, how can we make sure that everyone is equally heard, has equal opportunity to voice their opinions, even though everyone is different, everyone feels more comfortable, or feels differently comfortable when it comes to writing, when it comes to video conferences. So it's something that we all have to figure out, because it's not that trivial. There's the risk of isolation, of course. Also, that is very much dependent on your type of personality, but also, of course, on your immediate environment. Be together 24/7 all the time, and that, of course, is that's made worse by remote work, and in terms and by the situation that we're all forced in now, where we just have to also figure out how we can carve out our own space where we work, and where do we start the private life. That is always a challenge to draw those lines, but of course at the moment where everyone is sitting at home, it's even more challenging. And then of course there's the risk of burnout that is also closely connected to the isolation part. It's just a lot of people find it very, very challenging, very hard to really draw a clear line between work and private life. And that also is connected to the loose context and to this whole idea of a remote first work culture, because the risk of burnout is increased because you try to be as visible as possible. So because if you're not used to the situation, and if you have the feeling that you have to build trust with your superiors and with your colleagues, you really try hard and you try everything to basically be accountable, to reply all the time in a very short time, to show that you're online all the time, and just work incredibly hard to build that trust. But that just makes it very, very easy to burn out if you don't pay attention to that. So all in all, remote work requires new methods, new skills, and a new corporate culture to make it work for both sides, the employer and the employees, and also, of course, to all personality types, because we are all different, and this is very much bound to personality, and we really have to keep that in mind if we judge how people cope when they move online. Yes, so how do we all get started? The good news is that it's really, really easy to do the first steps, because 3 tools are enough. For starters, you need Slack or any other messaging platform. You can also use Mattermost, for example, if you want to support the open source software community. That also works very well. It's just not, as always, almost always with open source software, it just doesn't look as elegantly designed. But when it comes to the functionalities, it's also very good. You need a tool to work on documents together and to save them, of course. Google Drive is, from my perspective, the easiest and a very powerful solution, but of course there are many, many others. And then you need a video conferencing tool like the one that we are using right now, Zoom, which I think also during the last weeks they grew by I don't know how many 100%, but I mean everyone is talking about Zoom right now. And a year ago, I think I would have still needed to explain what Zoom actually is, because most people, when they heard video conferencing calls, they thought about Skype. But Zoom really is much more powerful, much more reliable, and just the better option. So those 3 things are really enough for the start. If you don't know what to focus on right now, I would really encourage you to just try those 3 tools, or at least those 3 functions. You don't have to use those exact tools, but the function, a platform where you can all communicate, where you can write messages in a very quick way, where you can form groups, where you can send direct messages. That's very crucial. A platform where you can collaborate, where you can save documents, where you can work on documents. That is crucial. And then we need a video conferencing tool to do workshops. But also, I mean, as we are all isolated right now, video is even more important. So video conference is important. So those 3 tools are really basically all you need, and all those tools are super simple to get started with. Like they hardly need any explanation, and so that's really easy. So I think if you haven't already, like within the next few days, you should install those tools or similar tools, and just try to think together about how you can incorporate the kind of processes that you had in the world before Corona, how you can translate those processes into the new remote world.
Very short question: is there an alternative to Google Docs? Because you mentioned Mattermost for Slack as alternative. Is there also an alternative for Google Drive?
Yeah, I mean, you can use a Dropbox, for example. It's not open source, but that's also a very powerful alternative that you can you can use where you can also now work together on documents. You can use Nextcloud, which is, as far as I know, an open source software where you can host your own data. So it's not, Google doesn't have your data. That's very important. And then you have Open Docs, which you can also share. So there's so many different options that I actually would recommend. And before I go through all the options for all the different functions, I would recommend you to search always for open source alternative to, and then to Slack, to Google Drive, and to Zoom. And you will find alternatives, and then you can just quickly check them out and see what works best for you. But there are open source alternatives for all of those three functions. Yeah, there are of course different dimensions of work in general, not only remote work. But in the office space, I guess the lines are a bit more blurry, or drawing those lines even is unnecessary, because if you are not at your workplace because it's after 6 o'clock in the evening, it's very likely that your workday is done. So no one requires something of you, or at least that was the case a couple of months ago or years ago. So drawing those lines was something that we didn't often had to talk about, because it was so, like, it was visible. If someone was there, if someone could be talked to, if someone was sick, and all those things, we now have to find different ways to express. So the different dimensions, one dimension of course is the workspace is also a social space, and that is very, very hard to transfer to remote work culture. And even more, that makes it even more important that you kind of count that in and really take your time to foster relationships. So in the offline world, the classic was the water cooler conversation, right? So everyone is gathering around the water cooler, and then you were talking about news like Corona, or you were talking about the Sunday soccer game, or of course who got fired, who got promoted, and who's just terrible. Which colleague is just a terrible human being. And those conversations you can't have anymore, of course, in that form. But you should make space for those conversations. And the best way, it sounds weird, is really by telephone. So I wouldn't recommend to take too much time to write short messages on Slack or any other platform like that, or WhatsApp, whatever. But really take 10 more minutes if you have to call a colleague anyway, and really talk about how they're feeling, how's their situation right now, how they're coping, especially in the days right now, in a situation like we have right now. What they think about, like, the news. Just really take time to foster those contacts, because written text is, like, people are always different in different channels of communication. You are different if you type, you're different if you talk, you're different if you meet someone in person, and we should really make space for all those. So that's why it's important to have those video conferences. That's why it's important to have the opportunity to write, but that's also important to really make space for just a regular phone call. And of course, don't feel guilty if everything, whatever it is, like not only fostering those relationships, but whatever it is right now, it can take time. Like, this is a very, very unusual and unprecedented situation, and it's new territory for all of us. So whatever it takes, take your time, don't feel stressed. I guess during the next 1 or 2 weeks, everyone understands that things might take a little bit longer, and then that you also, this is a great time to experiment. Everyone, there hardly will be professionals who know exactly the right way. So it's an experiment for everyone, and I hope you find it rewarding to take that as an opportunity, and really just use different tools, different approaches, and be playful with the whole situation and the tools. And of course, what's also important is a retreat. So if this keeps going on for longer, or if you really want to become a remote first company, which means that you really don't have office spaces anymore where you need, I think it's really it's mandatory to make space for at least once a year a retreat where you really all come together and meet in person, because nothing can replace that feeling and that experience. Yeah, then of course you have a deep work part of your work. And that is also something that is incredibly hard to move to the online world. So in the offline world, it's like either you're not at your place, or a very common kind of signal was also if people put in their headphones. Like, that was kind of like, especially when it comes to open plan offices or co-working spaces, everyone understood that kind of signal. If people were putting in their headphones, they don't want to be disturbed. And that, of course, doesn't work online in a remote setting. But what does work is to just clearly articulate that you are in your deep work section right now. There are varying time spans that people can agree on when it comes to how long you can be in that deep work tunnel. Some say you can't spend more than 1 day in a deep work setting. Other people say it can be up to 4 to 6 hours. It also depends very much on your personality. But deep work in general just means the time of the day where you really make an effort to not be disturbed. So it's not only that other people can't disturb you, but deep work also really means that you make an effort, that you don't get distracted by your environment. So it really means you put down your headphone, your smartphone, switch off ideally email, switch off messengers, do everything that you really can't be distracted, and have at least 1 hour per day to dedicate to the most important tasks. That's super crucial. Yeah, and to signal if you are in a deep work state, there are several options. One option is on Slack. You can choose different emojis that will show next to your profile picture, so everyone sees those emojis. For example, you could choose. So there is no deep work emoji right now, but what you could do is just use those exploding heads and write the state that you're in right now, call it deep work or however you want. And then once per day, you can just set a timer, choose this option, and then everyone can see that you are in the deep work state right now and don't want to be disturbed. Yeah, because of course, especially in the beginning, it requires trust, right? I mean, this is, I guess, how a lot of bosses might think about colleagues when it comes to remote work, that they just use that as an excuse to sleep long and only get dressed in a jogging suit. And that is, of course, also normal. I mean, I think we should also have empathy for bosses who are suspicious of this whole thing, for colleagues who are suspicious. This is new for everyone. And it will take time to build a level of trust. That's completely normal. But the good thing is now it's not voluntary if we have that time. Like the companies we're working for, they have to give us the time, and they have to give us the benefit of a doubt, because otherwise this whole thing just doesn't work. There's no better alternative than trust right now. Yeah, then we have the meetings. And like Pauline mentioned in the beginning, some of you already made this experience that you not only have situations like this where it's more or less where it's a one-way communication right now, or where you have a kind of check-in conversation where everyone's like quickly saying what they're working on today. But you might want to also have workshops where at the end, so during the workshop there's an open process, and at the end there have to be results. And that it's tricky. It sounds very trivial. We all take it for granted, and in the offline world, but it is tricky to use tools like, for example, like how does a creative process look like? How does design thinking look like? If you can't just like put post-its on your screen. I mean, you can put that on your screen, but other people won't see it. So it is really it's tricky, it's challenging, and that also leads me to the last part, which are the methods, because methods are always important, but in this new setting, they are even more important. And one, I can't dig too deep into it. I'm open for questions later on, of course. But one, just a brief overview of how you can incorporate different tools into a more creative online meeting. So, for example, there are slides, and I'm happy to send you the link afterwards, or send it to Pauline and she could share it with you. There are slide decks where everyone is having slides with sticky notes, like you see here. So, for example, just one idea among many. If you work on a creative challenge or task. So, for example, you want to understand how your business has to change in this new environment. What does this all mean for your business in the months and years ahead? And you don't want to just like push it onto your colleagues, but you want to make it an open process. You want to include as many people as possible. So you are curious what other people think. It wouldn't really make sense to ask a question like, what will your business or what will our business do in 5, 10, 15, 20 or more years? And then wait that 40 people say whatever they think. It's just like, that wouldn't work. Everyone would like be very annoyed in very little time. And it's also, I think the results would be really terrible. But if you want to ask those questions, or if you really are interested in creative ideas of your team members, maybe prepare a slide deck. Include one slide of those sticky notes, and then you can easily write down your ideas and put them on the slides where those questions are asked. You can easily copy and paste those sticky notes, and then before you have the workshop, everyone has to send in their slide deck, and then you have a facilitator, so someone whose job it is to kind of like digest the information and visualize the data that you sent in. And then you really have a working document, and then you can discuss only the results. You can also work with tools like Mentimeter, for example, or Nexenio. Mentimeter is like a survey tool, so you can just ask questions. Actually, while you're doing Zoom, that works parallel. So you have to prepare the question, of course, or should prepare the question. But then you can just implement it into Zoom, and people can vote immediately. You can use Nexenio, so that's a different tool that you can use parallel to a Zoom call, for example, which is basically a mind map. So it's a huge blank canvas, and you can even form different team sections. So you basically have like, you have like one big canvas, and then team A, for example, is in the upper right corner, team B is in the lower left corner, and they're all working in their specific fields, just brainstorming, putting on notes, and then at the end you can zoom in on specific teams, you can zoom out to get an overview, and then see what those kind of like brainstorming sessions really led, and then pick out a couple of ideas that you find appealing, and then discuss those.
Can you mention again the name of the second tool? So it's
Mentimeter.
Mentimeter.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can send you the link.
Yeah, thanks.
And then I wanted to dive in a little bit deeper into Slack, because I'm not sure if all of you have used it already. And as Slack is so crucial in a situation like this, I just want to explain that a little bit better. So in Slack, you have basically two different sections, two different main sections, or three. And on the very left, you have all the different projects. So some of you might not work only for one company, one startup, or one organization, but actually work in different projects, and they all have a different Slack group, Slack project. So those are the symbols that you find on the very left. You can easily switch between the project, and you find like completely different workspaces for the specific respective projects. Then in a given project, you have on the left gray area, you have the fields channels and direct messages. So channels is completely up to you. You can just open a channel, for example, a weekly meetup, or you can brainstorming for news. You can have channels for different beats, for example, like economy, sports, whatever. So that's completely up to you. They're easily set up. It takes just a couple of seconds, and then you have the choice if you want to leave them open for everyone, or if you want to keep them closed, so only people who are invited can actually join them. And then you have direct messages. So if I write, for example, now to Josh, which is listed here, then only Josh can see that. But you can also form easily groups. So I could form a group of Josh and Julie or Julio, and then we three can write messages together. So that not necessarily has something to do with a given topic, but sometimes you have a setting where you work very closely with certain team members, and then it makes sense to form a group with those team members. So for example, if you do product development, it of course makes sense to have one group of like the product group. So that's just something that I quickly wanted to show you, because what follows now requires that you understand the basics of Slack. Then on the biggest part, of course, is the screen that you see if you click in one of those buttons. So one of those channels and one of the direct messages, you see the profiles, and then you see what people reply. And the magic, of course, I think what also was so crucial that Slack became so successful is that it's designed in a really fun way, and it's ultra responsive. So the moment you write something, you click on enter, it's out there and the other person sees it. So Slack gives you a lot of room to maneuver, a lot of freedom, but it requires also structure, because it looks like so much fun. Some people overlook that you completely get lost if you are not very self-disciplined, because this can turn into a very, very noisy distraction machine if you don't take care. So a few basics that I think are really, really helpful and that you should implement. So if you have check-ins, so for example, every day you have your editorial meeting, or if you are a startup, you might have the so-called weeklies. If you use Scrum, like you use agile development methods. So whatever you have, you will have situations where you all get together and briefly talk about what you are working on right now. And those calls, they should be prepared. So what we do in the different projects that I work with, and that's one of the few things that I really have in all the projects, and I have very good experiences with that, is a channel called Weekly, which is this weekly kind of conference call. And in preparation to that call, because they have to be, or they should be rather short, you just mention the topics that you want to talk about. So I think a scenario that most of us know, or know from our own experience, is that we stumble into a meeting and there is not really a clear agenda, and then people start talking about their weekend, and no one really knows what they're actually supposed to do here, so they're babbling on, and it's just like very annoying and not a very efficient use of your time. And this is magnified if you move online, because people are just they have even less patience. So structure is incredibly important. So something that I do is, in preparation for those meetings, I quickly write a message in the group. The headline is the call on whatever date, and then just short hashtags or bullet points with the things that we want to talk about. And that can really be just like one word. You don't have to explain it, but the magic of it is that the moment you start the call, you already have an agenda and you have a structure, and you can just go through it point by point, and then people can elaborate what they actually meant. It's very simple, but very, very powerful. So I definitely encourage you to at least give it a try. And then, at least as important as the preparation is documenting the results. So you have your weekly call. Everyone talked about what stories they're working on right now, or what kind of product features they want to implement. And that was great. You had a great conversation, a great meeting. After half an hour, it's done. And what happens next? So you also have to, straight after the meeting, not wait 5 minutes, 10 minutes, straight after the meeting, one in the group has to write a message into this channel where it's clearly pointed out and documented what you discussed, who is doing what were decisions that were taken. And then the great thing is that automatically turns into a to-do list. So also for you, it's like really a great help, because you immediately see what are the tasks that you agreed on, what people expect of you until next week, and that really helps you focusing, because like I said, it's really hard to get lost in this remote setting. So really everything that gives you structure helps enormous, and that is a very simple thing that gives you a lot of structure. And also when it comes to the corporate culture and this remote first, it's also really important for your superiors to make very transparent what you expect of people, because a lot of people will feel not treated fairly if they have the feeling that they're working a lot, but no one is really appreciating it or seeing it. And that often is the case if superiors don't really clearly communicate what they expect. So that makes it very likely that people work a lot, but they're actually not working on the things that the boss actually wants. And they're working on many other things, but no one's taking care of that or paying attention to that, because the next week you actually want to see the results just of the stuff that you agreed on this week. And whatever you did aside of that will very likely get lost, even though it might have taken you a long time. Yeah, and then there's the point of automation and integration. I mentioned that you can use a lot of tools together with Zoom. With Slack, it's even more. You could really call it magic, because you can integrate a lot of apps. There are hundreds of apps direct into Slack, so you actually don't have to leave Slack to engage with Twitter, to do Zoom calls, to do to update a GitHub, to update Google Drive. All those services you can integrate into Slack, and then you can at least some aspects you can directly control and command from Slack. It's very powerful, but of course also it's very likely that you will be overwhelmed. So this is just an inspiration. If you go on the Slack website, you will easily find a section called apps. There are different curated lists with the most popular apps, with apps that are very important for certain jobs. There are guidelines, so you're not alone. But I would say this is something, it's important that you know that this is possible, but it's something that you shouldn't pay too much time or attention on right now. It's something that you can still play with later on, but it's good to know that it's possible. And that's basically it. That are the basics. I promised to keep it very basic and short, and now I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Frederick. Perhaps you can stop your presentation so we have your screen a little bit larger. So only your photo and my photo probably. There occurred some questions. Mm-hmm. You talked a little bit longer than we expected it, but it was really interesting. Thank you for your insights. There was a question occurred pretty early. Perhaps you can answer that right now. How to insert GIFs into a presentation? A really easy question, probably. Before we go through remote work.
You could just go on. So, for example, do you see my screen right now?
Yeah.
Okay. So you could just go to you go to Giphy, which is like the biggest search engine for GIFs, and then say I want to use this GIF.
Yeah.
What is this strange?
So here, click on the. No, actually, that's not working. Wait, it's not working. Let's try this. Okay. So you need to go on the detail page of the given GIF, where you have all those options, and then it's super simple, because you just have to right-click here, and it's German. It's basically copy image. And just go to your presentation, a slide, press Command and V, and that's it. It needs to load usually a couple of seconds, but then usually it works. Okay, why is this not working? Great. Okay, but that's the way I did it.
That's a normal way to do it. Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Let me try it again. You always, and that's also important, you always have to wait until this is loaded. So in the beginning, you don't get the option copy image. You have to wait until you get that option. But why it's not working right now? Let's see.
It's a presentation effect.
That's the presentation problem, yeah. But that's really the way that you usually do
it. Good. Okay, good. Perhaps, you can stop your presentation, and then we can discuss. Perhaps you can again define the difference between remote work and home office to make it really, really crystal clear.
Yeah. So, I mean, both are types of remote work. Like whenever you're not in the office, when you are working, you're working remotely. home office just is a specific type of a remote work setting, and it's particularly challenging because it's so hard to draw the lines. So if you, for example, go to a co-working space, you're also working remotely, but just because they're physical two different spaces, it's much easier to draw the line. And the moment you leave the co-working space, your private life starts. And if you don't leave your house, your room, or whatever you work in, or wherever you live, it's just so much harder. I mean, of course, if you have like a huge house and you can basically like go from one wing to the other, it might also be easy to draw those lines. But usually that really is the challenge. And of course, it's also challenging because there are so many things that require your attention in a private setting. Like I said, I mean, it's so much easier to think about doing the dishes, doing like vacuum cleaning, folding your clothes, whatnot. And that all those things, if you work in a co-working space, it's just not the case. It's a different setting, and you can more easily focus on work. So actually, I would recommend to do as little as possible remote work from home. But at the moment, of course, that's not really our decision in most countries.
Yeah, many people are forced to work remote right now. Do you think that everybody can do home office?
I mean, of course, it's not rocket science. Everyone can do it, but for sure, people will find it. Some people will find it easier than others, and some people really run deep risks of really getting depressed, burning out. So it's really important that we support each other in a remote setting, to have a lot of patience and understanding, especially in the beginning, in a situation right now where everyone is new to this. Because some people will find it easier than others, and that's totally normal.
There's a question: how do you boost team morale?
They're really taking. I mean, gifts. Generally taking time to go beyond work, to listen to, especially right now, to just really listen how people are feeling, how they're coping. What they do with the situation, taking time for private life, and offering help. It's super important, and it shouldn't be an afterthought. It should not be like, okay, we still have 5 minutes now, so let's briefly, everyone has one sentence to say how little or much depressed they are. Make space, make time for that.
Or a little bit concrete, how do you motivate the team and yourself to meet the tasks and expectations?
But transparency is key here. I really think so. I think most people, and I guess all of you, we really want to do a good job. We want to be proud of ourselves, not only want to get like a thumbs up from the bosses, but we just want to have for ourselves the knowledge that we really did good. But as like most people, we are dependent on external feedback, right? I mean, we can end the day and have the feeling that, wow, yeah, that was a really productive day, I did well, but it just doesn't feel that great if it doesn't also is appreciated from your coworkers and your bosses. So it's super important, and that actually puts the pressure on your bosses, not on you, that they think about how they can make transparent what is expected of every one of you, and then really praise people if they deliver on what they promised, or give also praise if people failed, but then really explain well why they failed and try to learn from the failure. So it's not about success, it's really about making transparent what is expected of the people, and then praise the people that they paid attention to that and experimented and did what was asked of them. And that really motivates me.
And how to establish a company culture if people only know each other from the screen?
It's tricky. I mean, there are some minor tweaks. For example, everyone can post a short video of themselves, right? That ready, and you could maybe do that every week or every month, just to make it a little bit more lively and get out of. For example, this is not where I live. This doesn't tell you anything about my personality. So I think it's really important that we make space for people as personalities, as individuals, and videos are one way to do that. You can also make challenges. So for example, you can make one Slack group where people post a reading list. So everyone has to recommend or can recommend one piece of reading or one documentary or whatever it is. And that is also so first of all, it's really a great resource. I did that a couple of times and I came across really great recommendations that way, but it also tells you so much about the people. It tells you so much about the interests, about the hobbies, about how they view the world. So that's also something concrete that I can really encourage you. Mm-hmm. And then what I do right now is just make it actually a challenge for a team. Like why not all together think about what would help each and every one of you to feel appreciated and help you to focus and work productively. And then you just share the results, and then you discuss the results, and then someone can draw their own conclusions and then decide on what will be implemented.
There's a question by Natalia. She's from Moldova. She works at the startup called Rise Moldova. They're doing investigative researches and stories. And she's asking, what is a good free app or tool for Mac for taking notes or to write to-do lists? Can you recommend anything?
Yeah, I mean the Mac has the task app where you can already. So the Mac comes basically with a to-do list. You have the notes as well that you can use as a to-do list. And what I also do is to use the Google Drive tool. I think it's called Notes. So if you go into the Google Drive and you go through the apps, there is I think it's called Notes. So it has the symbol of this light bulb. And that is a great to-do list app as well. That's also for free. But actually what I would recommend the most is not use any tool, but use a piece of paper and write it down. Because nothing is as rewarding as like really physically like cross through something that you've done. Like a click is done, like, yeah, it's not a very, it doesn't take long. It doesn't like transport feeling, but this feeling of really like getting rid of something that you manually written on a piece of paper is so much more rewarding and hence so much more motivating. So I actually stick with this after experimenting with a lot of things. That's the only thing where I use paper still.
Okay, so we have half an hour left. The questions are not so many as I expected them to be. So if you would like to ask a question directly to Frederick, of course you can raise your hand and then I can let you speak if you want, but you can also write your question into the chat window. As long as I know you, this is for a while, you work remote. Can you share your main learnings concerning remote work in the past 5 years, Frederick? It's like, what were your main learnings?
Yeah, the main challenge really is this, what you rightly pointed out as well, is the focus. It is like, even after working remotely more or less for 8 years, I still find it very challenging, depending on how well I slept and what other things are happening in my life, to really be like 100% focused. But that is also something that I think we all experience if we go to the office. It just doesn't feel like it, right? I mean, I know for sure when I went to the office, I also had good days and I had like worse days. But yeah, it always felt like you really did something, because you went there, you kind of survived 8 hours, and then you can go home. And I guess I for sure know days where I start, and after 8 hours or 10 hours or 12 hours in front of the screen, I don't have the feeling that I really got something done, because I got distracted, or because I just was not really focused. And that is a very, very depressing feeling, because at the end of the day, you can't really blame anyone but yourself. And that, I think, is one of the aspects that make remote working so challenging, that you have the feeling whatever works, it doesn't work, or specifically the things that don't work are your fault alone. And so to find a way of dealing with that kind of guilt trap that you easily fall into is really important. I mean, I can definitely assure you, be generous to yourself, be kind to yourself, because most often it's not your fault, and it's totally normal to have better and worse days. But yeah, I think it's something that we all take time to really let sink deep. And then another thing is to spend as little time as possible online. Really, it sounds counterintuitive, but the more I work remote, the less time I actually want to spend on Slack, the less time I want to spend on any other app. So what I'm doing is I work with a method called Pomodori technique. Some of you sure are familiar with it. There's an app called Pomodori Timer, like the tomato in Italian. I can also share the link, of course. And it's super simple, but very powerful. It just sets a timer for 25 minutes. And then after 25 minutes, you can have 5 minutes break, and then you can reset the clock. And it's so trivial and so simple, but it helps you really focus, because you basically, after 25 minutes, you account to yourself what you did. And no one wants to spend even 25 minutes without any results. So that is just, it's like meditation, right? Where you focus on your breath. It's such a simple reminder to really focus on what matters, and just be aware of what you want to achieve.
Okay, so there occurred some questions right now, what is really pleasant for me. So I can just ask you the questions that our participants are interested in. Most of all, the brainstorming tool is obviously of really interest for many of the participants. So you mentioned the tool Mentimeter for making a mind map, also as a group, and which can be also probably be integrated into Slack. Perhaps you can just share your experiences with that tool with the others.
Yeah. So the Mentimeter, that was not the brainstorming thing. Mentimeter was for polling.
Oh, okay.
You can prepare questions, and then you can ask them and get the immediate results. And I actually didn't work with Mentimeter, with Nextboard. I worked with MindMeister, which is a German startup. It's also doing those brainstorming canvases. To be honest, I personally don't like neither of those tools very much. I don't use them. But I know a lot of people like those methods, so I would recommend just giving it a try and find out if it works for you. It's just in general, if you like brainstorming, then probably you will like the Nextboard. I don't like brainstorming very much in a traditional way, so for me it doesn't work. But that's also like a very, very important learning to take away. There is really not the one app or the one kind of set of apps or the one technique that works for everyone. It requires a lot of testing to find out what works best for you individually and for you as a team and a company. And this is the time where you can just dig into all sorts of apps and try it out.
How would you recommend dealing with the team with technology changes? For example, Slack is much better than WhatsApp for work, especially in this particular context. I'm not sure if this is a question or if it's a remark. If Slack is much better than WhatsApp, but how would you recommend dealing with the team with technology changes? So perhaps if another technology occurs that should be used by all of the team members.
I mean, this is a challenge as old as technology is, and the smaller and agile the company is, the easier it is to just try something new. And if you work in a big corporation, changes like this are almost impossible for you to make. So there's not an easy answer to that, but I would recommend just experimenting. This actually also, if you work within a team where you have the feeling there might be a couple of colleagues who really enjoy testing new tools, and then if they tested it and found them convincing, then they can recommend them to the whole team. You actually also might open up a Slack channel, and then you could just make it a kind of like challenge, a weekly challenge. Everyone has to recommend an app that can be something that replaces something that you use already, but it also can be something that's just fun in general, and people just enjoy for whatever reason. So yeah, there's not this one answer, but that actually might be a real good idea to open up a Slack channel and then think about alternatives to the technology that you're using.
Asif has a technological question: how to avoid echo while setting in our concrete rooms. So he says that he can also feel in our actual talk an echo, which is making it hard to grasp every word. I don't hope that everybody is hearing an echo. But yeah, do you have any recommendations for avoiding echoes within a conversation?
Yeah, but actually,
no echo, Raja says. Okay, good.
Yeah, it might be, and you did everything right, Paulina. It was my mistake. You can easily avoid that if you use headphones, of course, because now there was a mistake of mine. I didn't do that, so my loudspeakers might hear what you are saying, and then that might result into an echo. So using headphones prevents that.
Okay, good. PJ asks, I struggle as a manager to manage my remote colleagues, subordinates, when I only have 1 to 2 hours with them online every week, and especially when I can't see their faces when I talk to them. In particular, I've struggled dealing with disagreements between colleagues of different nationalities and cultural backgrounds. Any suggestions or ideas? This is the question, you know, when problems occurred, or how to avoid conflicts. Perhaps something that you can say in this direction. The question occurred at F&A, not in the chat window, but at F&A.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
now I get it.
Yeah. So he works with different colleagues from Southeast Asia. As he is the general manager of New Narrative, new media startup from Kuala Lumpur, and they don't see each other, probably because of the internet connection, and how to struggle with that probably sometimes there occurred also disagreements between colleagues of different nationalities and cultural backgrounds.
I mean, it sounds really stupid, but first of all, I would try to understand if they see it as a problem themselves, because sometimes we see a conflict where there actually not necessarily has to be one, and then even if there is a conflict, then some people don't really have a problem with that much. So I would first ask the staffers and see how much of an issue it is for them, and then ask them how they would resolve it. That's sounds very trivial, but that's one of the key leadership techniques, is that you don't, like, when it comes to new work, at least, like the new style of leadership puts like leaders not in the role of like the wise men and women who know the problem to the solution to all the problems, but more like a coach who helps the staffers to find a solution for themselves. So in this scenario, I would just involve the staffers and try to help them find a solution for themselves. And then how that might look like, I don't know. But that has nothing to do with remote, really. I know that remote is making it harder to form those bonds, but the challenge is a very typical leadership challenge, and you have that in every setting, and the solution always is to include the workers in finding the solution to the problem.
Merga raised her hand and I did not take her question because we had to go through all the other questions. So she wrote her question into the chat window. Sorry, Merga, for not giving you the permission to talk. What are the limitations for not introducing such tools to employees beforehand? Why is it only during crisis? Mm-hmm. How can we avoid such circumstances in the future? A really good question.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very, very good question. Also very sad, because we see that, of course, not only when it comes to remote work, but like the medical system, for example, the health system. It's really tragic that we can't prepare for a scenario like this, and just do stuff that is obviously working better in a given scenario. I mean, when it comes to remote work, the simple answer is that it requires change, and like hardly anyone likes change, and especially superiors usually are a little bit older. The older you get, for most people, it means you're like even less open to change. So yeah, the adversity to change anything really makes it so hard. It also makes it so hard to innovate in any given field. But that is changing as well, luckily, because yeah, there's no alternative to that. I mean, we went through a disruption before, and now like Corona really pushed on the fast forward button, and the dynamics that were at play beforehand. Like, I mean, many of you, I for sure, many people that I know, we already had the feeling that we were lacking so far behind the possibilities that we had in this new digital world. And now there is just no way around it anymore. I don't know how, if we learn from that experience and be wiser when it comes to the next kind of wave of technology and be quicker in implementing it and using it in a wise way. But I know for sure that that the technology that we have right now, especially when it comes to remote work, this is something that won't be just tried out now for 2 weeks and then we go back to the ways we used to. This is a shift that's for good. I'm really certain of that.
Mm-hmm. Gilberto from Brazil, he works at Agência Lupa, a fact-checking newswire. He asks a very good question that is also relevant for many of us, also for you, Frederick. To me, the most challenging thing working home office is dealing with children. I need to be kind of mean sometimes, trying to make my 2 children that I'm at home, but I'm working. It's not that difficult, but a little frustrating. What are your tips on father guilty working at home? Understand that I'm home, but I'm working. Thank you, Gilberto, for the question.
Yeah.
Dilemma.
Yeah, it is really tricky because I mean, in general, I would really say don't do it. So that's the reason why I usually go to the co-working space. It's not really working. And what I'm doing right now is closing the door. But it sends a weird message, right? I mean, if your kids know that you're around and they want to play with you, and you just close the door, it's not a good situation. I like, if there's any way, avoid it. Like, don't try to work at home if you have kids around. But I know it's not possible at the moment. So something else that I tried is again using the Pomodoro technique. So also in this regard, don't expect of yourself to work 8 hours. I don't know how long you have to work, but if you usually have to work 8 hours, just don't expect that to happen. And expect maybe 4 hours. And if you get more shit done, then that's great. So, and if you don't put that much pressure on it, what that allows you to do is use the Pomodoro technique in this way, that you say, so half an hour I'm working concentrated and really try to get as much stuff done as possible and not waste even a minute on Facebook or any other app that steals your time. And then after half an hour, you spend half an hour with your kid. And usually after half an hour, I mean, depending on your kid, depending on you, but after half an hour, usually I'm actually quite happy if then I can also get back to work. And for the kid, it usually really feels like like someone is paying attention, someone is respecting their needs. And ideally, what also at the moment really helps me, of course, is that my wife is taking time, and then she just as long as someone is taking care of the children, of course, that already helps. But of course, like. We luckily don't live in the time anymore where it's acceptable and where it's also like for men a really nice feeling to just kind of like push the child rearing away from you. I mean, we want to spend time with the kids, and we should give us the time. And I think the Pomodoro technique really is something that you should at least try.
Mm-hmm. Raja asks if there are any tools that you can recommend which record the progress of your tasks and tasks of your team. You mentioned that it's really important to protocol everything that you talked about on the phone or on Zoom or whatever. And is there any tool that also records the progress of your tasks and the tasks of your team?
There are, but I have to admit, I never used them. I don't find them very helpful. Because I worked in small teams where we just had really a good level of trust, so we didn't really need them. But I know in bigger teams that there is no way around it. It's super helpful, and especially also for freelance, it's very helpful. So I would also write it down on the list of the tools that I'm going to send you straight afterwards. And then I know 3 apps. I think one of them even is for free. Yeah, I'm going to send them straight after the meeting.
Okay. And what are the main mistakes, what do you think, concerning remote work? Are there any?
Yeah, the focus again is really drawing the lines, the focus, super tough. Apart from that, for the superiors, like I said, it just requires especially from them a completely different leadership approach, and that I think might be really challenging for them. So I think actually it's a much more challenging time for leaders than for anyone else. Yeah, but I don't know if there's like one typical, so there's not like one button that you can press and then your day's work is done or something. So I really wouldn't know how to answer that question.
Okay. And if you should select only one tool, what would you say is like the most important tool working remotely? Like you mentioned a lot of tools, but if you would have only the possibility to choose one, like what is the most important tool according to your point of view?
The most important is mail, but that's so trivial. I mean, of course, everyone is using email. Yeah, if I could only use one tool, I definitely would use Slack. That's the most powerful.
And do you also use WhatsApp right now more than earlier?
No, I try to keep WhatsApp as good as possible, completely free of work. It drives me nuts. But I know that there are a lot of people use it. Also, like it's really different from country to country. So I know, for example, in Brazil, it's completely normal to use WhatsApp in a professional context. So yeah, I mean, I'm definitely not saying that like this is wrong, but for me, it's not working at all.
Mm-hmm. Jan mentions the biggest mistake could be starting to work in your pyjama without having breakfast and being washed. So probably it's the best way to see it, like you go to work, right? So you also have to dress up and to make you feel that you're not going, going out of your bed and then starting working, but you have to prepare yourself also to start your working day, right?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah.
And
there's a saying by, I think I don't know exactly. I think it was the German fashion designer Karl Lagerfeld. If you leave the house with a jogging suit, you lost control of your life. And now we don't leave the houses anymore like that. But yeah, just as a reminder, if you work professionally, dress professionally, even if you don't leave the house, I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, because also the attitude is another one, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Because when you're sitting at your desk and you're dressed up, you have another attitude than sitting there with your pajama. We have like 30 minutes left for our discussion. In our announcement, we mentioned that we will also briefly talk about legal issues. So can you say anything about who is paying my hospital fees if I have a coffee in a co-working space, for example, or we wrote an avocado toast, for example?
Benedict had a really good point here that I wanted to pick up, because it also fits really well with the Pomodoro technique. So he's writing, I totally agree, routine is king, for example, making sports, get a breakfast, get dressed up and start working. This is really great. If you look at your day, like something that you like, small chunks of tasks that you do or you'd like to do every day, like sports, like breakfast, like all those things. What really helps me is to not do all those things in one go, and then have like this huge piece of work. But what I actually do is really start working as fast as possible. So, I mean, I don't do breakfast, so I usually just have coffee, shower, and then I start working immediately. But then, of course, there is like, I do lunch, I do sports, I spend time with my kid. And if you like cut down the day into those half an hour segments, or you can even make 1 hour segments, and then you have those changes all the time, because that's the great thing that working, especially from home, allows you to, like, your day passes like nothing, and in every half an hour you're completely aware of the thing that you are doing right now in this half an hour, because half an hour is so quickly done that you don't want to waste a minute. So that really helps you be fully aware of what you're doing right now, and at the same time the day just like feels so much more exciting, because you have all the time something to look forward to. There's all the time there's change, and you don't have this feeling of, oh no, shit, I still have like 3 hours to go before I can do a lunch break or something. So this is really basically tricking yourself, playing a trick on yourself to make you more productive and just make the days more fun. It's really a great comment. And with the legal issue, I mean, at the moment, so when it comes to the official laws, if you just do co-working, at least in Germany, that might be different in different countries, and something happens to you, that's bad luck. If you don't have a team office, so co-working has, it's a gray area basically. So if you hire a team office, so if you go there every day, if you're a permanent renter, and then something happens, that's considered your workplace. But if you just occasionally go into a co-working cafe, like, it's a huge problem also when it comes to the taxes, right? So in Berlin, for example, if you there are a lot of co-working spaces where you can just order a coffee, and then you have 1 hour, 2 hours, or whatever of co-working. So the reason you order a coffee is not because you necessarily want to drink a coffee, but that grants you time online. So, like, a very basic assumption is that when it comes to taxes, you can deduct those expenses, but the tax office says no, it's a coffee, and it's a restaurant setting, restaurant-like setting, so bad luck for you. So it's really tricky, and I think it would be, it doesn't really make sense if I give very broad explanations of the legal situation, because that it's a kind of area that is, even though kind of it started like 10 years ago, it's still so early days in many countries, even in Germany, even in America, that you really have to consult the co-working spaces, have to consult corporate lawyers, because it's really, really, really tricky. But if you are afraid, do that really as fast as possible, because if something happens and you didn't really know the framework that you're working in right now, that can really break your neck.
So I would encourage to ask another 2-3 questions, because then we have to finish our webinar session for today. Benedict agrees totally. Routine is king, for example, making sports, get a breakfast, get dressed, and start working. So he made also good experiences with that. There was a question, what could be the ideal duration for online meetings, as a face-to-face meetups are comparatively comfortable and the attention span during virtual meetings is shorter?
Where is that?
At 17 minutes past 4 o'clock. So what could be the ideal duration for online meetings? Is it like half an hour, 1 hour, 1.5 hours, like we do it right now? What do you think?
I think ideally it's half an hour. That works very well. At the longest, I would say 1.5 hours. Yeah. And then if you still need, so for example, what we do, so those villages that we build, every 2 months we have like a meeting within the group. So it's a co-op. So the people who are funding those houses and later on live in those houses, they of course are also part of the process. And at the moment, we really have to like tackle a lot of big issues, like how should the co-working space look like, or what kind of like common infrastructure do we want to build. And we usually meet in person and then spend a whole day getting to know each other and talking about those things. And now we also have to move those online. And it's really, it's very tricky. So what we do right now, because there's so much to do, is so much to talk about and so much to decide. We have 1.5 hours where we try to get as much information across as possible. We have we open the space for questions, but we make really clear that the questions should be like only very important questions, and we will answer them as briefly as possible. So within those 1.5 hours, we really want to get as much information across as possible. And then we have a break, and then we have another hour where it's only about questions and answers. And I think really that's it. Like after 1.5 hours of break and then another hour, people are completely fed over with online meetings.
Benedict says, from his experience, take your time to wash the dishes if it's bothering you and accept it as a break. Just don't focus only on this kind of tasks who procrastinate.
Yeah.
This is a good suggestion. Jan asks, a Zoom session have to be paid if they are longer than 45 minutes. Do you know how expensive that is?
Yes, €13.99 for a basic version. So it's not very expensive. But
there are different packages at Zoom, right?
Sorry?
There are different packages at Zoom.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there are also like bigger corporate packages. I think you can spend up to, I don't know, like 150 to, I don't know, I have to check it out. For regular users, the cheapest option should be doing it, and it definitely allows you to have longer meetings. But as long as possible, actually try to use this drawback actually as a benefit, because it really helps you discipline yourself and try to stick to the 40 minutes, and then you can still make a pause and just like start another call. So actually, I don't think it's such a bad thing that you only have 40 minutes.
You mentioned as rewards that people who work remote, they have more time and higher productivity. And on the other side, the risks, it's that it's also, the risk of burnout, for example. How do you handle the fact that you can work endlessly, after 6 p.m. and also on the weekends, and, how to split that private sphere from the working space?
I would recommend to every day write one task in your calendar that you want to get done. And usually, so when it comes to those weekly meetings, for example, where the bosses are defining who is to do what, it rarely happens that you give out more than 5 tasks packages to any colleague, because you usually really talk about bigger tasks, and everyone knows that you can't tackle like 10 big work packages every week. And if you write that down in the calendar, then I would try to, as quickly as possible, tick those big packages off. Like really think about what is required of me the next week, for myself to feel proud, but also to give the colleagues, my team, and the boss the feeling that I really delivered on what I promised. And everything else, you can really look at basically something that you can do if you want to, but it's not mandatory. It gives you just mentally so much headspace, and really makes it much easier to then transfer to the kind of private space. So if you ticked off this one thing, even though you didn't do anything else that day, you can kind of like give yourself a green light that it's totally okay now to spend time with your kids and just shut down the computer and forget about
it. This were my kids. They're right now with their grandparents, but obviously there are no more questions right now in the
just
chat
one
window.
question maybe for me, so I don't forget anything. What were the things that you were interested in? I write so the time tracker apps I wrote down. What else were you?
The time tracker app, yeah, because there was the question if there is something more sophisticated than Excel.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that people know how much they worked or the team members worked.
Okay, and then remember the open source alternatives. I can also
yeah, and the brainstorming app you already mentioned. I also put the link into the chat window.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think this was a really good start for a series of talking about working remote, to be honest. We are talking or discussing internally right now at DW Akademie if we will have 2 or 3 other webinars in the next few weeks about working remote. So that we can, you know, discuss different aspects of this really complex topic that everybody of us has right now to get familiar with. But for the moment, I would like to thank you, Frederick, for your time. It was not that easy to find a co-working space in these tough times in Berlin. So you made it. Thank you very much for being with us, giving us so many tips and tools. Thank you to the participants for your questions. This was a really lively discussion because there were so many of us interested in that topic. And yeah, I hope to see you soon again in our next webinar. And stay healthy, take care, and goodbye.